Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. There was very interesting news making headlines this week in many newspapers in Mexico, and there was a lot of discussion in regards to what this meant. And it seems to be good news. It was reported this week that the United States, for the first time, in 2023, I'm sorry, became the first exporter country that exports to the United States more than China, and that's a big deal. Those of you who are following the show know that there has been this push, at least in paper. We could discuss whether it's happening or not, to try to use Mexico or the advantages Mexico has in terms of being a neighbor with the United States. This whole idea of nearshoring became a thing this week, and perhaps what this information is telling us that it is actually happening. But at least the bottom line, in 2023, Mexico was the number one country exporting to the United States. Into context what this means, joining us today, you know him well, is Professor Sergio Negrete. Sergio, welcome to the show. Good news, but what does this really mean?
It means that indeed, Mexican exports have been increasing significantly, undoubtedly due to the fact, as we know, that the US has been putting some obstacles, let's say, to Chinese trade. Well, Mexico, as many other countries, by the way, has been taking advantage of it. The thing is that Mexico right now came to the first place as exporter to the US, followed by China. But let me say, just behind China in third place, but very near to the second, is Canada, as it's normal to expect, by the way. But still, what I'm trying to say is it was very, very near that China was pushed into third place in 2023. But well, yes, in that sense, let me point out that Canada is also being benefited by this nearshoring phenomenon. And understandably so, by the way. It's also a neighbor, more expensive than Mexico. Yes, please.
Yeah, well, explain the concept nearshoring for those of those in our audience, and I'm sure there's very few that don't understand what this concept means.
Of course. The concept really comes from the pandemic. The fact that the pandemic disrupted so severely trade, production chains, manufacturing chains around the world, that pushed the concept that maybe it was not such a good idea to have your production. If you are, for example, an American right. company, that you're producing in Indonesia or in China or that it's very far away. So that it was probably a best option to get near to your shores. And that's why we have this nearshoring word that is really, until now, obviously a very significant or used buzzword. I suppose that's the expression in English. And well, it indeed is happening. To the pandemic, what happened also is that since the years of President Trump, he started also to hinder trade with China. So right. we have the combination of the two things, because obviously now the pandemic is over. We may say, well, that's behind us. So why it continues? Well, yes, the notion that prevails that maybe it's not such a bad idea to have some productions nearer to your country, but also the fact that this has continued with the Biden administration of not being so friendly, not so open to trade with China. And many countries are benefiting. Let me tell you, I think that the main beneficiary of all this is not Mexico is number one right now in terms of absolute numbers, but the one that has grown incredibly in recent years, its trade with the US, it's Vietnam. You may argue that's not very near to the US. I agree, by the way, I fully agree. But well, the fact is that you have American companies diversifying away from China.
Yeah. And it's when you think how incredible that is because up till what, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the United States was at war with China. So that is even more incredible, excuse me, with
with
Vietnam,
Vietnam.
in the 70s. So I mean that's even more incredible when you think about that. The fact that now Vietnam is one of the US closest allies in terms of exports and commerce. Let me ask you this: Was what is Mexico doing right to have in order to promote nearshoring? Because there's still a lot of debate whether Mexico is not really uh, uh, using its neighborhood in implementing policies that would facilitate nearshoring. And I mean, we saw it this week. There was a huge standoff in the border in Laredo and between the two Laredos. Simply, trucks could not pass. There was a standstill because it had something to do with software that is used to export goods to the United States, and they basically closed down exports from Laredo into between the United States and Mexico in all the different borders in Laredo. So, I mean, I'm not too sure that Mexico is really using the moment to promote nearshoring, but it's happening regardless of whether the Mexican government is promoting it or not.
I fully agree. Let me put it this way, and that's what you have been saying. Nearshoring is benefiting Mexico, is going to Mexico, despite the government policies, not because of the government policies,
Right.
because really I cannot find one other, let me point out to one if you push me, that the Mexican government under Lopez Obrador, and the current president, he signed the new trade agreement. As we know that that
USMCA, yeah. Yeah.
exactly the USMCA, that's what I would point out, but obviously that's not very recent. On the contrary, what you are having is a government whose policies, particularly in the energy sector, but not only in energy, have been really, anti foreigners, not really
Yeah.
helping.
Well, this whole issue that has to do with the monopoly of the electricity, CFE, the Federal Electricity Commission, and all these suits by American companies. I think there may be one Canadian company against the Mexican government under the USMCA. In addition to the fact that everybody that I talk to seems to say that there's just not going to be enough electricity if the nearshoring fantasy actually becomes a reality. And electricity is very expensive, and there's, energy in Mexico continues to be very contaminating. I mean, they're not setting it up in a way to facilitate more companies' willingness to run the risk to invest in Mexico. But yeah, I spoke to some very important CEO this week, and he says that American companies are willing to take the risk because where else do you invest right now? You know what I mean?
Yes, I mean, indeed, geography is a very powerful factor. I fully agree with this person that you talk to. But still, I mean, you talk about energy, you talk about security.
Security,
Now,
yeah. Rule
I
of
mean,
law.
there are several factors that, I mean, if you want to talk only and only, and obviously that's not we cannot generalize that way. But if you want to talk only about proximity, go to Canada.
Right.
Obviously, Canada was much more expensive, but still, as I mentioned, Canada is also benefiting, not surprisingly, with this phenomenon. And yes, there are several reasons. I would rather think of many American companies stating something like, "I would love to go to Mexico, but there's these several issues that stop me from doing so." And of course, yes, other companies stating, saying their CEOs, well, let's risk it. It's worth it. We may, or we have already considered, factored in all the negatives, and still it's business. It's profitable. Okay, then I suppose it goes, depending on the business, the sector, then you take your decision.
And it appears that unless something dramatic happens, the trend should continue. Now, you and I were talking about this off the air about the role Trump could play in all of this, because if he does, if Donald Trump is reelected, and boy, it was a crazy week for politics in the United States. But if Trump gets reelected, then once again, there's going to be this confrontation, very clear-cut confrontation with China. But it seems that Mexico has benefited from that confrontation.
Yes, but Donald Trump, as we know, he's against all countries, let's say, that have a significant surplus with the US, a significant trade surplus. Number one is still today, now, is China, and by a significant margin. If you want, the 2023 figure is $279 billion of surplus of China. Mexico's is 152 billion, and third place in surplus terms, Vietnam, $105 billion. So those are the countries for Germany. And let me mention Germany, because you may remember, at least I do, that there was something that Trump had against the export of Mercedes cars to the US by Germany, from Germany. And you would see that he would look at the countries which had a surplus with the US and attack them. And that included Germany, also China, also Mexico. Canada is in sixth place. So rather, if you want the top five that President Trump may attack in the future if he goes back to the White House: China, Mexico, Vietnam, Germany, Japan.
Oh, God.
Canada is number 6. I know.
Well, it's always great to have you on the show, and of course we're going to continue to talk about this. It seems to be good news, and I hope it continues, because we like to have good news on this show. Sergio Negrete, it's always great, Professor. It's always great to have him.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Ana Maria, for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria